Good morning. The other one that was off. A stellar, amazing bunch. Thank you for coming out. When we first conceived of this conference, probably 2 years ago, we thought that we would have to spend money beforehand to go and do research, to find the stats, to scare everyone about the state of the industry. We don't think we needed to do that now. And like everyone else, we had to cut back, so we chose not to do that. But we are going to follow up afterwards through the good offices of MacArthur and through the good offices of McCormick, as Steve said. Before I move on, I want to thank, of course, Steve Shepard and Judy Watson here at CUNY for allowing us to have this here, and also the amazing David Cohn, who was the one who really established this. Where's David? Let me see where David is. He's off working. There you are. And David, you'll see the work that he's actually working on now and be incredibly impressed, even more than you are already now later. I want to just try to set the table a little bit here and be in what I like to say is high altitude and low oxygen in terms of trying to push the idea of some new models. And I think the point of today is not to come out with any silver bullets. If we had them, we would have fired them already, but to try to see new models, new worldviews, new structures, and then figure out from that where to go. So I hope that you'll find some inspiration in the folks who are talking today, because there are people who are executing new models and doing new things. And we're going to cram in the morning so we can get as much of that in as possible. We have a session on new structures for news companies, news organizations. We have a session on network models, and then we have two lightning rounds, 5 companies each, of people who are executing new things. And again, my hope is you come out with strategies. In the afternoon, we then have, I like to flatter ourselves and call them Aspen Institute-style discussions. The trees outside aren't as sylvan as you'd see in Aspen, but where the real point is work product is coming out of those groups. We will charge you with work out of those groups to try to come back with new models for networks, new revenue. Anybody who gets new revenue models gets a gold star. New structures for companies, and so on. And then come back here at the end of the day to report back from the rapporteurs and leaders and discuss those as a group. And then you will get your very well-deserved wine and cheese. So let me start off here and just talk for a minute about some new models. There we go. This is the kind of, I'm very bad at graphic software, so my ideas are as primitive as my graphic software. But the point is that there is a new worldview going on thanks to the internet. Right? The old media model was pretty obvious. There was the world, we were the press, and then it went to the people. But now, if you draw the world around me, which is the way it should be drawn, I have all these new sources. The press is part of that. Other media is part of that. My peers are a huge part of that. For my son, it's a gigantic part. We get information from work and companies and government. And so if you look at the press sphere, the sphere in which we live now, it's a different structure. And I think that we start to see ourselves in new relationships with others. By the way, this presentation, for what it's worth, will be up at newsinnovation.com. There's a version of it there now through the wonderful offices of SlideShare. So for example, in the recent kerfuffle about the Associated Press, they have their board meeting this morning. Some of their members will be here later this afternoon. We look at, I think, 2 fundamentally different economies striking each other in a millennial fashion, which is the link economy and the content economy. In the content economy, we owned content. We could sell it to others. They could monetize it. They gave us money for that. It was a beautiful thing. It's too bad it is ending, but it is. In the link economy, of course, all you need is one copy of something online and then links to it. And that changes the economics in fundamental ways. In the content economy, we owned or controlled content. We syndicated or sold it because we had that control. We had many copies of it. We monetized at the edge and then gave money back. And the value was created with the content. In the link economy, one copy, many links. The important thing, what this requires of us is to be very open, very searchable, to open our drawers completely to Google and be found that way. We monetize at the center. We take advantage of those links. He who gets the links has to monetize. The links also bring us efficiencies. It's good news, right? What my cheapest PowerPoint and blog line is, but it got quoted a lot, is do what you do best and link to the rest. And that's what the link allows us to do in news organizations. It allows us to, it forces us to specialize and do what we do best. So the value is then created with the links. In a kerfuffle recently with EAP over cease and desist on links, I saw these two worldviews hit each other because the wire service said, basically, you're taking our content and our value. And the bloggers said, we're giving you value by giving you links. And each fully believed what they were saying, and there we saw the clash. We also see a change in news, I think, about an idea of product versus process. I love the extruder. I just came back from a trip to Germany, and I have my Wurst fix, and so it makes me very happy. Don't tell my wife I had the cholesterol. So we had to view news as a product because it was the necessity of our means of production, right? It's obvious, but we printed once a day. We had one show a day. Get it right. We own and control that, or in some cases, we're lucky enough to monopolize that. It meant necessarily we were centralized, once a day, one way. And you know, I think this last line here is not meant as a joke, it's serious. Perfection was our standard because you do it once a day, don't screw it up, kid, was what we were all told, right? That's what we had to do. We enter a new world now where process is taking over. I saw this when I went to The Guardian talking about their new newsroom structure. And I saw this clash happen there, where the print people saw product and then online people saw process, and that the process was the product. And I was also at an Aspen Institute event where former president of a network said, don't judge us by our process, judge us by our product. It's a different worldview. It's a different way to look at what we do. So if we think of news as a process, as I say here, it never starts, it never ends. It also demands that we become transparent. We put up in blogs what we call half-baked posts, which sounds abhorrent, and from a journalism professor's mouth especially it sounds abhorrent, that I would say, hey kids, put up half-baked things. But my friend Nick Denton, who I think is late getting up but will be here shortly, translates that in a good way. He says, when we put up this half-baked post, what we're saying to our public is, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, what do you know? And that we fill out the news that way in that kind of process. And I think it becomes important then, one of our greatest skills then becomes not to say what we know, but to say what we don't know. It's a different worldview. It just changes things. This process of news is all enabled by links, but importantly, we'll get to this momentarily, it in turn enables networks. It makes networks possible. This is my silly little bad graphical chart that just says that we used to look at the story, again, as the center of this. And in many ways, it still is. But I was at a session with Jay Rosen at Columbia a while ago. How's that for being ecumenical, all three of us? And Jay was saying that we look at the discussion, if I misquote him, I know he'll tell me. We look at the discussion about our stories. It's always, we write the story first, and then people discuss it. You know, enough about you, what about us? And the problem is that we think that's a reaction to what we're doing. And Jay said, no, it's probably the beginning of stories. In that discussion, we're seeing what people don't know, what they're confused about, what they're wrong about. And if we listen to that, then journalism should come out of that. So that becomes the discussion becomes the beginning of the process. And in that process of creating the stories, we do what a lot of great reporters are doing now with their blogs. They're asking the public what they know, who should I talk to, what should I ask them? And yes, a story still comes out of it. It can, most times it will. But after that then does come comment and correction, and it becomes a great Mandela, going around and around and around. And I think it's a different way, it's a different worldview. And if we look at our business on that basis, it forces us to look at our product differently as a process. And I wonder then, I'm now paid to ask obnoxious questions and say silly things. Thank you, Steve. But I wrote a blog post the other day and just a column for The Guardian last night, wondering whether the article is the best essential unit of journalism. It's what we had before. It was necessary before. Again, the article or the story was what went into the paper, what fit into the news broadcast. But if you look at the financial crisis especially, Adam Davidson is here from NPR, you'll hear from him later, and he started a podcast called Planet Money, recommended highly, npr.org/money, right? Where the process of unraveling this incredibly complex story is more than just a product. And it can't be told in a story, which become very repetitive. If you know more than the story says, then you're frustrated by not having enough depth. If you don't know enough, you're frustrated by having only one paragraph of background. It's a different thing. So what's possible in the new basic unit of news? And I speculate that it might have these elements. Yes, I start to believe that blogs cure everything, including the common cold. But the blog format is a process format. It's a process of discovery. Wikis are very good because they're a snapshot. What do we know now? Here's what we know. Links and curation. Curation is a word I've been overusing a lot lately. I think it's really important that that's one of the great values we bring to the world, is to curate it for people. And that's part of this process of doing what we do best and linking to the rest. Someone there did a great story on it. Why replicate it? Let's link to that, and then let's add to it, become additive. And then discussion, input, correction, addition, all is important. And yes, we all want that to be more than, you suck. And we'll find ways to make that happen, because the people out there are smart, and we have to find new systems for that. So if we go past the article, we have a new structure for that. But then, how do we relate to our world? We have always been centralized. Again, by the means of production and distribution, we've always been centralized. Google is distributed. Google, so those are ads from the New York Times I got about 2 weeks ago. So that 4-bedroom, 5.5 bath, $80 million apartment, I bet you could get for a steal now. I'll bet it's still on the market. So those are the Times ads, the marketplace. We all went to the marketplace to do things. Now Google, of course, comes to us. Google thinks distributed. In the centralized world, I pick on Yahoo. No one's here from Yahoo, right? So I pick on Yahoo versus Google. Yahoo, I think, is the last old media company, because it operates on the media, on the models we all used, which is I own or control content, I market to get people to come in, I show you ads until I wave goodbye. Google, on the other hand, goes to wherever we are. Now, in that view, the brand is the magnet. People go to the site every day to see what they have to say. In the distributed world, we go to the world. We get our stuff out there everywhere we can. There was a quote in the New York Times in a Brian Stelter story about 2 months ago that passed around like wildfire, and I'm sure you all heard. A college student said to a researcher, if the news is important enough, it will find me. So how do we be found in this new world? It's a new model, a new worldview. The brand becomes less the magnet to draw people in and more the descriptor once you get there. My 16-year-old son, Jake, JakeJarvis.com, who programs Facebook apps and does wonderful work, and I learn everything from him. He's my secret weapon. He goes to TechCrunch 20 times a day, but he never, ever, ever types in TechCrunch.com and says, gee, I wonder what Michael Arrington's going to tell me now. He only goes to the links of peers through Dig and Facebook and RSS feeds and blogs. I think that's where we have to think. So the audience becomes our distributor, and that leads to new models. Same time, I always hear people say, well, when is online going to pay for my newsroom? And my unfortunate answer is never, not the newsroom as it stands now. We don't need the same thing. So one group this afternoon will be looking at new newsroom structures. Yes, that comes from shrinking size, but there also become new opportunities for new efficiencies. We don't all need the TV critic, even though I was one. I got out of that. And we need new kinds of job descriptions. We need people who are going to work collaboratively with the community. So what does this structure look like is one of the tasks this afternoon. Do we even have a newsroom? There's Edward Russell's beautiful newsroom on top. Right, that's yours. I stole the picture from somewhere, so I don't have the rights to it. And there's a Mojo, reporter in the car. I think it's the Bergen Record, is it now, that doesn't have a newsroom? Fort Myers. That's Fort Myers there, but isn't it Bergen County doesn't have a newsroom? Right? And so do we even need the room? Why do we need the room? What do we need the room for? Or rather than looking at it as a newsroom, what about looking at it as a network? And the idea that we are working collaboratively with the public to do news. This is a chart that I hope you'll see later when Samir Arora from GLAM gets here. And GLAM is a very controversial business. I've talked about this before, and people will nitpick about it, and there are things to nitpick, that's fine. But I would urge you not to lose sight of the opportunities of this model. The GLAM model is pretty damned impressive, whether or not you like its execution at GLAM, and I'm surprised we haven't seen more attempts to do it in the news business. And that's one of the morals, I think, of today, is how do we look at using these new models in new ways. In the network model, we don't own it all. We work with the public. We become a platform that enables others to build things. You'll hear from Tom Evslin later about the economics of that network model. And they're, to me, who didn't stay awake in econ class, very counterintuitive. But so much of this world is now counterintuitive. Until you've intuited, then it's not counterintuitive anymore. We get to critical mass a lot faster, a lot cheaper, with a lot less risk. I just wrote an op-ed that I'm trying to sell around, that if we look at this new economy here through the eyes of Google, We see that you grow to big size by growing networks, not by anymore by borrowing a lot of capital to buy companies. Those days are over for a while, I think. So then there's the question of the corporate structure we'll talk about, and Edward and Roussel and Dave Morgan are going to talk about that shortly. Of course, we were one company before, and we were all inward focused. If we break it up, what do we look like? And if we don't have print someday, I'm not trying to kill print. Print's a good thing. I'm not trying to kill the article. It's a good thing. But if we don't, what do we really need? What's our relationship with ad sales? Do we need manufacturing, distribution? They'll talk about that. We end up then with these new company structures. And I would only urge there that we should plan for that world. Whether or not we think it's really going to come shortly, to not plan for it, I think, is irresponsible. Then we have the idea of public support. Please, sir, may I have some more? You should have Oliver going through your head now with that picture. Very important, I think, for today's work that there is no white knight. Just as there is no silver bullet, there is no white knight. We had the belief, a year ago I would hear people say, if only blank would buy the blank, everything would be okay. If only it would go private. I see someone from Philadelphia nodding her head, Wendy Warren. God bless, somebody came along about the Philadelphia Inquirer, but debt is hard. And the business realities today are all the harder. Foundations don't have the means to support every bit of journalism in the country, nor should they. Journalism must be a sustainable business enterprise. I teach a course in journalistic, entrepreneurial journalism here. It's not an oxymoron. And we've got to show that business can be journalism and journalism can be business. So we need desperately new revenue models. I wish I had them. I don't. I'm just a journalism professor. But I hope that there are some ideas here in new ad networks and marketplaces, perhaps, new kinds of networks, hyperlocal, whatever, new ad models. Maybe we sell relationships or targeting, or I'm working with a company called 33 Across that may be here later that tries to sell influence. Maybe we need new measurements to prove to the advertisers how wonderful we are. That's what's gone on before online. And maybe there's new side door revenue. Kevin McKean from Consumer Reports is here, and they've been very lucky. We all wish we could do what they do, but I don't think we can. And then there's Google. What's our relationship with Google, and what can we use to get it? Now, I don't mean to plug my book. Due out in January, Collins Publishers. Pick it up on the stands. It's on for sale for Amazon right now. But as I did that, I tried to look at the world through Google's lenses and try to see what are the laws. And I had this first discussion with Martin Nissenholtz at the Online Publishers Association some time ago, where I was arguing that we have to think distributed. And Martin still said at the time, though he now has an API for the news, Vivian, you can talk about that later, but he said, no, some brands are still worth coming to. And that's true. The Times brand is worth coming to, but it's also worth distributing. How can we get this stuff out there in as many ways as possible? How do we become networks and platforms to enable a larger world to do more? How do we collaborate more? I'll skip that. I think, how do we have our own 20% rule for innovation? That's the greatest crime, I think, of all, is that we're just simply not doing enough innovation because we think we can't afford it, but we can't afford not to. We've got to get better about realizing that perfection is not the product, because we can't be. So life is a beta. Things will go out imperfectly. We will learn when we put them out imperfectly. That's probably the best lesson there is from Google. But first and foremost, we have to decide what business we're in. What are we really? If we're not manufacturers, if we're not distributors, are we an information company? Well, information can become a commodity. Are we community companies? Not yet. We're not doing a very good job of that. I hope we become platforms and networks, but what are we? So, a lesson point. AOL thought it was a content company, which led, of course, to its disastrous merger with Time Warner, about which I'm still very bitter since I held on to the stock like an idiot. I feel better. AOL was, in fact, a community company. Its chat and its discussions led the way. It was, years before Facebook, it was Facebook. It just didn't know it. Yahoo, my whipping boy, thought it was a content company because they all want to be like us. They all want to be content companies, which led to be bait for Microsoft again and again and now again. In fact, it beat Google years before in advertising. It had the models long before. It could have been Google, but it wasn't. So I would ask that as you go to the sessions today and as you go this afternoon, rethink who we are. Have your existential moment. And take that as the basis of the beginning of the discussions to say, okay, what is the essence of journalism, the essence of its value to the community, the way we can monetize that value and support that value in new ways. And that's the whole point of today. So The rest of this morning is going to be more fast talking like this, not quite as fast as me. But I thought it was best to try to pepper with examples. So there'll be little time, if any time, for question and discussion, because we'll have that time. You can approach anybody during lunch, during the break, this afternoon in the sessions, and so on. So I thought we'd just get going.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Edward Roussel. I am the editor of telegraph.co.uk, which is a UK-based website, part of the Telegraph Media Group, which as a sideline also publishes a couple of newspapers, the Daily Telegraph and the Sunday Telegraph. I'm here today to talk about do what you do best and outsource the rest, a quote inspired by somebody I know. The genesis of this discussion was a breakfast I had with Jeff recently in London. And as I recall, Jeff, I was bitching a little bit about our technology department and our sales department and highlighting some of their shortcomings and essentially making the case that the shortcomings in our technology might be an impediment to our future digital growth. And I put it to Jeff that perhaps the way we should be thinking ourselves and perhaps other newspaper origined organizations is that we should focus on what we do best, which is creating compelling content, and outsource, at least as far as the digital is concerned, the rest to Google. After all, they have the distribution platforms, the search technology, even the monetization technology to make content work globally. And of course, you know, the real issue is not so much Google and indeed not so much outsourcing, but the fundamental issue is in a recessionary environment like the one that we're in, where do you put your capital, where do you put your investment, and where do you not put your money? And I thought that this kind of quote from Jack Welch was particularly apt. This is a good time for rigor to look at what you want to come out with at the end of the tunnel. This is not a time to skimp on resources, but to focus them on your best business. Stop the weakest, invest in the strongest. Sometimes it's best to look back to the past for a view of what the future may look like. And if we go back sort of 500 years to the time of Pope Alexander VI, one of the most sort of feared of the Borgia popes, there's a situation where the Roman Catholic Church essentially operated as a regional monopoly, as a business, where the customers were the 40 million odd inhabitants of Western Europe. The shareholders, well, there's only really one, which was Pope Alexander VI, and paid himself a pretty healthy dividend. But the strength of his business lay in the fact that he operated a monopoly. And if you challenge his monopoly, it's pretty straightforward. He'd burn you at the stake, possibly, as he did with Savonarola in the main square in Florence. Then along comes a guy called Gutenberg, who, unbeknown to Alexander VI, starts playing around with a new technology called the printing press, the first true mass market information technology. And the implications of this technology are phenomenal. Suddenly, a whole raft of new ideas begin to undermine the monopoly. The likes of sort of Galileo and Martin Luther begin to spread ideas in a rapid way around the Western world, at any rate, which fundamentally undermine the monopoly of religion in that region. So the Catholic Church is at a critical point in its history, and it could have died. It could have died at that very point. But then what happens, rather remarkably, over the course of the next 400 years, is the Catholic Church reinvents itself as a network, the first, arguably, truly global network, with the help of the conquistadors, which took missionaries around the world, and it used the technology of the printing press to turn itself into a network by spreading the word about Jesus in the Roman Catholic Church. Today, the Roman Catholic Church is a 1 billion person strong global network. Fast forward to the present day, and how is this relevant to the newspaper industry? Essentially, newspapers have operated as regional monopolies for most of their period of time, and the areas that they monopolize are often reflected in the titles of their publications: Los Angeles, New York, Washington. They're protected, the monopolies are protected by the high barriers of entry, right up to the point where suddenly the web comes along and the barriers are pulled down and there's an influx of new content that invades their market. So the challenge today is, how do newspaper groups recreate themselves, rather like the Roman Catholic Church, into networks? Some of them may be global, some of them may be local. And it's worth reflecting a little bit on what are the characteristics that make for a powerful, strong network. From where can we take inspiration? And I think that there's three key characteristics of a successful network. The first is clarity of purpose. So where do you invest your money? What is it that defines your brand? The second, and it's an obvious one, but worth reminding you, is you need to be useful. You need to fulfill a need. And the third is that typically successful networks started as nimble, low-cost operators, and even when they're not so small, they continue to operate as nimble, low-cost operators. What does this mean for a newsroom? How does one affect change in a newsroom to work and operate more as a network? Over here on the left-hand side, you've got the traditional newspaper monopolistic approach, where you control your audience and therefore you have perhaps 15 to 20% of your content that's premium, which means content that only you have, that defines your brand. It's your scoop getters, your columnists, the people with sort of verve and tenacity about the subjects that most interest your readers. You've then got this middle tier, which I've kind of called sort of repurposed content. These are the people who come in every day, who put on a tie, a jacket, they sit down, they file their story at sort of 5 p.m. in the evening, but fundamentally what they've done all day is they've rewritten the wires. And then you've got the outsourced content, the AP, the PA, Getty, etc., which is there to kind of fill out the content so that you've got that breadth. That doesn't work in a network economy. In a network economy, you're going to be defined by what you do best. And therefore, in a network economy, to go back to Jack Welch's point, this is a time, even in this recession, where news organizations need to be investing more money in what's premium. They need to invest more money in what defines them, the content that none of those competitors who've infiltrated their market through the internet, the stuff that they cannot do. And I guess the question is, you have to ask yourself, is what is your premium economy? Is it your columnists? Is it your sports coverage? In essence, you need to be able to answer that question with clarity and then be investing more money in that premium content. How do you pay for it? Well, I'm sorry to say that the guy who comes in every day with that tie, puts a tie on and rewrites the wires, he's not going to have a job for very long. He's not fulfilling a useful function in the sort of the news distributed economy. That content can be better provided probably by other people, can be outsourced. It'll be cheaper and arguably probably better. We've recently done a number of outsourced initiatives at The Telegraph. We've brought in ITN to help us with our video. Recently, we brought in Breaking Views to help us with our financial commentary. Not only the structure of those, not only is it far cheaper to have done those particular deals and to get that content through the outsourced model, but equally, those people do it better than we do. And the notion of outsourcing, obviously, is not just about your being clear about what you're going to outsource in terms of your journalism. It's also your technology. Let's face it, if you're a newspaper group, your technology sucks. So outsource it. I mean, when I first arrived at The Telegraph, I was surprised to see that we had a 130-person technology department. And the process was that, you put in a change request, you ask for a new function to be built, and people would go away and they'd just literally try and build it. And usually what happens is the product never appeared. So we've taken a more radical approach. We've sort of reduced by more than half our technology department without reducing the total budget of that department. And now it's about curating your technology, to use that phrase. And curation is a very skilled task, picking out the exact right partner, whether it's an editorial partner or technology partner that fulfills your particular need. But the key thing about the network economy is you get better service at a cheaper price. And so that's got to be the way to go. So what does this mean in terms of the economies in the digital sphere? On the left-hand side, you've got the newspaper cost base, and it's staggering to see that 60% typically of newspaper costs, at least in Europe, are industrial, i.e. manufacturing and distribution. 60%. These newspaper groups are industrial businesses, not only in the way they operate, but also where their costs are spent. Then you've got IT and offices, sales and marketing 10%, editorial about 25%. In a network economy, you shouldn't be cutting back on the 25% of your cost base as editorial. Sure, you should be restructuring it. More of it should be curated, but you should also be spending more on your premium content. But you shouldn't be looking to cut back that pot. That is what defines the product that you are. On the other hand, you can get rid of the manufacturing and distribution costs. You can cut back on the IT spending by better curation with working with better partners. And sales and marketing, at least theoretically, you could completely outsource to a partner like Google. So the issue here is CEOs of newspaper groups tend to get fixated by how can we raise revenues to the level of the newspaper. That's the wrong point. That's the wrong question to be answering. The answer is you probably can't. You probably need to be increasing your rate of revenue growth at about 35% per annum for 10 years typically to reach the level of a newspaper group. That's before the recession's kicked in. It might take a bit less than that time now. Is that going to happen? You know, one or two web operations may succeed, most of them won't. But that isn't the point. In a digital economy, in a network economy, your costs come right down. Back to Jeff's point about the guy in the car fighting from the car. You know, and you don't actually need to be thinking about something as radical as not having a newsroom. There's the whole industrial side of the operation. And to end on a sort of more positive note, the good news is we're doing a lot of things right. Some figures released this morning back in London in the UK showed that the top 5 newspaper websites for the first time reached more than 100 million global unique users. That's a big number. They are already becoming newspaper groups, global networks. Our own traffic has tripled in the past 18 months. If you take the BBC is now the number 4 website here in the US. The BBC in the US. Yeah. I'll get back to you. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, with respect, I don't think that's the point. The issue here is news organizations going very fast. According to the audited figures this morning, more than 100 million uniques. But certainly by the BBC's own estimates, their big presence here in the US. And British journalism, which has been landlocked for more than 300 years, at least newspaper journalism, what it turns out is it's a mass market export product. The combination of high-quality news and provocative views works around the world. Alexa, you probably don't trust that. That's the source. So to finish on this note, what are the things to focus on? It's your premium editorial. That's what's going to define your brand. And cutting back on the salami-cutting reduction in costs around newsrooms around the world is a very dangerous way to go. If you continue to do that, you don't have any more premium content. To use the Jack Welch approach, what Jack Welch would be doing in this moment right now is he'd be investing more in your premium content, however you define that. It's about outsourcing to the rest, and that's a very skilled task. Curation is a very skilled task, a very underrated task. Picking out the right partners, not only in terms of your technology, but also in terms of your editorial, that gives you the sum, that gives you the whole, a product that's probably cheaper to produce and also, almost certainly, of a higher quality. And lastly, organizations should be focusing on profit, not revenue. The days of trying to match these very high-level profits for sort of large newspaper groups is over. On the other hand, a fleet-footed, sort of low-cost, high-quality organization can, in the future, I believe, be very profitable. Thank you very much.
Good morning. What I'd like to do in starting off is give a little bit of my perspective and biases, because I'm a bit opinionated, and so at least, you know, I recognize coming in that you should understand where I am coming from. Most of my career for the last 17 years, in fact, my entire career for most of the last 17 years, has been online and has largely been in advertising, focused on monetization. I worked first in the newspaper industry and helping launch newspaper websites and build business models around them, actually pre-web, and newspaper and new media projects in the early 90s. I started one of the first ad-serving ad network companies called Real Media, which became 24/7 Real Media, and then was recently purchased by WPP. And then I started an advertising targeting company called Dakota, which I recently sold to AOL Time Warner, and I even spent a few months as the executive vice president of global advertising strategy at AOL, which would be other stories. But before that, which I think gives you some perspective, I used to be a newspaper lawyer. And while I've been fortunate to have accomplished some things, and you get some little awards, and the Ad Age names you things, without question, the award that I'm most proud of is 15 years ago winning the James Madison Award from the Society of Professional Journalists for contributions in support of the free press, and running hotline services and doing pre-publication libel review and filing amicus curiae briefs in the courts. So I believe in news, I believe in journalism, but I also believe if you can't make it pay, get out of it. So, and these are some things I've written about in the past, so they will sound familiar to some of you. First, did anyone read the story yesterday in the Wall Street Journal about McClatchy's earnings? Did anyone read this quote? Did anybody read this quote? We believe that the majority of the decline that we are currently seeing is cyclical and therefore temporary. Gary Pruitt, CEO of the second largest newspaper company in the United States. I think Gary is an extraordinary executive. I like him. But this is bullshit. I mean, come on, it's not, you know, when are we going to get by the cyclical part and recognize that it's secular? I mean, what empirical evidence exists to support this? Does anyone think there's any empirical evidence when the line has been going like this for 23 years? It's a big cycle we're talking about. Now, part of this is, and this is why you can't hold it against Gary, the people who have risen to the top and are doing well in the newspaper industry are doing well because they have been able to run a manufacturing and distribution operation really, really, really well. And they make sure that it works like it did yesterday. They make sure the newspaper shows up on the doorstep by 6 a.m., and they make sure the car dealer doesn't get pissed off. And that requires don't trying anything new. Don't put a new strapping machine into distribution because it may screw up and the newspapers won't get there, and you lose 2% of your circulation. And also, take the car dealer out to golf or lunch at least once a month, and the money keeps flowing. And people that are really good at that are not the same kind of people that are great at innovation. So it's not surprising to see this. But this is one of the reasons why we have not seen change for the last 17 years, that this should have been like as clear as the end of the nose on their face. Oh, I know. I was hesitant to tell people where I came from, but, you know, I knew there were enough people that knew. And I'm going to say, I think he's an extraordinary executive. Okay, it starts today. I had, by coincidence, 15 years ago, I was at lunch. I can't remember the exact day, but I was at a lunch in York, Pennsylvania with Dean Singleton, the then and current CEO of Media News. And what was unusual about that day was the day before he dropped a bit of a bomb on the newspaper industry in the United States. He shut down the Houston Post. He actually sold the Houston Post, a circulation list, and the brand to the competitor Houston Chronicle that day, the day before, of the Hearst Company, for about $100 million. It was controversial because we're talking about, I think, a couple thousand employees. It was controversial because it was about $100 million. And, of course, he had already scheduled this lunch. There were about 5 of us. He was there. And the first question was, well, why? And if people know Dean, he doesn't, he doesn't feel like he needs to have public supporters, he doesn't need to have that validation. He said, look, I'll tell you, but I'm just not going to talk about this again. I have cleared that I can talk about it because I talked to him about this a few years ago. And he said, it's real simple. It's 2 newspaper town economics. He said, and it's Chevy buyers versus Lexus buyers. He said, we were the highbrow newspaper in Houston. Newsprint's coming up. Our cost structure is fixed and growing. Our revenue is flat. And he said, there's a lot more they have the Chevy readers, and we have the Lexus readers, and there's a lot more Chevy dealers and Chevy buyers and Chevy advertising and classified, and we're going to lose. And the moment we start declining, it's a death spiral. He said, I either get my $100 million now, or I'm spending $100 million in losses to lay people off in 3 years once newsprint comes up, and we go under. And so what I think people have to understand now is, given the competition from the internet and everything else, he said, because in a 2-newspaper town, you don't control your margin. You can't gouge your consumers and your advertisers because you have competition. You don't have the monopoly protection. Well, guess what? In an internet world, you don't anymore either. The other thing that came out of it was, and one of the things he said, and this is something that we talked about. He said, don't think that the Pulitzer. And I won't give this entirely to him. I'll actually give credit to this to Art Howe, who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist from the Philadelphia Inquirer in their heyday under Gene Roberts. And he said, do you know why the Philadelphia Inquirer won? And I'm like, why? He said, it wasn't because of Pulitzers. He said it was, we kneecapped, we had better connections to the mob, and we kneecapped the Philadelphia Bulletin distributors on the streets. We won the distribution war, and only after we won the distribution war did we start winning Pulitzers. Look at the great newspapers. Look at the 2 newspaper cities where one went down, and many times the best journalism was with the loser. The one that won was in distribution and manufacturing. And the third thing is, and I have to say this just to be clear, I am on the board of directors of A.H. Belo Company, a public newspaper company. So what I say here is clearly my opinions. By no means represents the company. You may get a sense of what I say in some of the board meetings. But, there's been a lot of discussion, and I know he's here, but, did Craigslist, kill newspapers? Well, what people don't recognize, it wasn't Craig, it was newspapers. They've been gouging consumers and advertisers in the classified space with their monopoly for 20 years. And as soon as people actually find out that it's free distribution and it's great content, you actually recognize that's where the business model should have gone, and the newspapers weren't. And so I think there's nothing more important than, A, newspapers facing reality, and that it's a market problem, a business problem, model problem, and a cost problem. It's not a news problem. And prepare for disassembly. And I know this is simplistic, but I think it is the only way we can imagine newspaper companies going forward today in any kind of value for shareholders or any kind of sustainability for some of the assets they have. These were vertical monopolies that worked because they supported each other, and these businesses have been run to optimize the protection and the support of the interconnections of the monopolies. And my belief is that the only way we are going to see some of the value in the assets in newspaper companies today transition and still be relevant in a few years is we're going to have to break them up, spin them out, and be prepared for lots of pieces of it not finding a tomorrow. I do not... if we look at local news and editing, the point that almost virtually every CEO and major publisher of a newspaper I talk to says the same thing, and Jeff mentioned it, which is, well, when's online going to pay for my newsroom? And the answer is, it won't. Stop tethering it to that and let that organization focus on developing news and information in its marketplace for whatever markets or whatever purpose or whatever distribution is possible. Push it outside. 2, distribution, manufacturing and distribution. The cost around this is extraordinary and going up. At the same time, newspaper advertising revenue and circulation is going down. And yet, I know we're seeing some circulation revenue coming up now because some people are turning up or cranking the pricing up and are starting to ignore ABC. But most likely, the amount of money that you're going to be able to take out of the market is pretty fixed that you're going to get people to pay for that print product. And just little things like the workers' compensation rate for those people is about 25x the people on top. And by having that rating, it actually raises the rates across the whole company. So this is the time. This piece can be effectively outsourced in most newspapers today. And if it can't stand alone, then that tells you something about the value of print products. But actually, if you look at the Valpak and all of the NSA and inserts and a lot of the other things in the United States market, there's actually quite a bit of business in printing and distribution. And this is something that newspapers are going to have to come to grips with, because this cost alone will sink what's good in a newsroom. Ad sales and direct marketing. The people that sell ads today in newspapers, and even the very best newspapers and the most progressive in the United States today, still take orders. They are order takers. And I know there's some people that actually hustle outside and come up with creative solutions, but there's a limited amount of creative solutions or marketing solutions you can deliver into a market. However, in most cases, the newspaper company in the United States has by far the largest advertising marketing organization, human organization on the ground, and the best and most well-known brand and the most relationships. That doesn't mean you can keep shoving, old, outdated product at prices that is unreasonable and unfair down that pipeline, but it does mean that you can try to put these people out, or those that can evolve, and try to build essentially local advertising agencies. Because in the United States, we have large national ad agencies, we have some small and regional ad agencies with limited clients, but you tend not to have, particularly at the media management or media buying side, actually a group of people that you as a marketer can go to and place advertising or get qualified leads in any kind of simple and efficient way with help, unless, of course, you go to google.com. And so I think there's a real opportunity for newspapers to untether their sales and marketing organization and put them out on their own and see if they're going to survive and thrive or not. Printing, it goes with distribution. It either could be in distribution or outside of distribution. But there is no question that the biggest problem in the newspaper companies today, in addition to the cost of distribution, is when you have declining revenues and declining margins, it's really hard to deal with a fixed cost structure like printing that isn't just fixed, it is going up because of the cost of energy, the cost of ink, the cost of paper, the cost of personnel, the cost of all of the healthcare costs that are associated with that. And the tough thing about this is you can't take 10% of a printing press out. So either you print a lot more stuff and you focus on printing well and you have a printing expertise and you let that business sit on its own under a different capital structure, someone that wants to invest against it, or once again, you have a really big anchor. I mean, look at the, how many lines of double-stack metro? Who's from Philadelphia? How many lines of double-stack metro are in East Conshohocken? And what capacity do they run at today? I mean, maybe one of the most sophisticated printing operations and mailrooms in the entire world. It certainly was when it was built. And it is the biggest white elephant. And of course, it was built for a whole different kind of distribution anticipated at the time it was built. And digital. Tethering digital and making digital a sidecar to a newspaper is killing newspaper digital. What I find amazing is if you go back and you look at the newspaper conferences and you look at the people that worked in newspaper companies in 1991, 92, 93, 94, and 95, look at NAA Connections, look at what was the Kelsey conferences and editor and publisher, look at the early IFRA conferences, the FIEG conferences, and look at the list of the people who were there. And you will see a who's list of some of the best and brightest minds that have had some of the most success in online, and less than 10% of them had it in the newspaper companies. Because those companies couldn't understand it. Those companies basically built little speedboats next to their big cruise ships, and as soon as the cruise ships started sinking, they all started jumping into speedboats and killing them for what they were good for. So I know it seems a little simplistic, but I've run businesses, I've run operations, I understand, but if we don't, this would be a poor bastardization sort of this, but only divided can newspapers and journalism endure. And I just think the notion of the package is gone, and we're going to have to focus on the notion of actual value to the companies and a disaggregated future. Thanks.
Okay, great to be here this morning. Just want to spend a little bit of time talking about what we've been up to at IDG. IDG over the last number of years has been transitioning from print-focused organization to a digital-centric company, and we've had to really change the culture of the whole organization. In some ways, our organization is pretty well set up to take account of the new economies on the web, and that we're decentralized rather than centralized, and we're actually very distributed. But we've had to really retool the organization. We've had to really change the whole culture of the company to really think about being a web-centric, a web-first organization. That's required us to really develop a lot of skills and sharing of knowledge in the organization. What's going right, what's going well. We've had to sort of do a lot to really retool our workflow process. Every piece of content today is looked at from a web-first production process. Our whole workflow systems have changed. We've been sort of mothballing some of the old K4 systems. We're now also thinking, Jeff sort of alluded to this, as not really thinking of it from an article perspective, but really thinking it from a series of objects perspective. We're looking more at a sort of content database strategy, where objects could be the discussions, it could be parts of information coming from wikis, it could be the content itself, and how's that information put together and repackaged. Print's going to continue to be a very important part of our business going through, but there's no doubt that IDG is going to be distributing a lot less print as we go forward. As we've heard, the economics of our industry are changing very fast. We're having to follow the eyeballs, our marketers are following the eyeballs, and the eyeballs have moved into a digital world. And increasingly, we're going to move from an online world to a mobile world, and that's a whole other discussion, but it's something that we're very focused on at IDG. Got some of my notes up there, but in the interest of time, I shall move on. Can we? Okay, that's fine. We could go there. Yeah, Jeff's been actually pretty kind to sort of give me a little bit of PR and promotion, via his website. We've been talking about the sort of tipping point that's been going on at IDG for the last couple of years. It came to the realization a couple of years ago that our online revenues were growing faster than the decline in our print revenues. So that really caused us to focus on rechanging the culture of the organization. I got a little bit of, maybe unwanted sort of focus on some of my blog comments recently when Jeff took a little bit of liberty and rewrote some of my headlines. And so, talk about print sucking. It doesn't suck, but as we've heard, the economics are changing, very, very rapidly. So from a practical point of view, we looked at one of our brands. It was InfoWorld. It had been a venerable publication, for nearly three decades. It was in a very, very competitive, space. The space was overpublished. Advertising was reducing. We analyzed all the sort of different opportunities that were available to us. From selling the publication, closing it, merging with another. By the end of the day, we realized there was a huge amount of brand equity still in that publication. So, we decided to sort of completely refocus the organization, on online and events, and actually give up on the print publication. It was a very controversial, route to take within the organization. A lot of emotional elements attached to so giving up on print. But what we've been finding, was that the organization had become relatively demoralized. Print was sucking the energy out of the organization. We are seeing growth and profitability in online and events and losses in print, which was threatening to actually bring down the whole organization. So by taking the very bold step and the aggressive step of moving away from print, we were able to completely reorganization. We felt sort of unburdened by the print product. Now, not every organization is going to be as aggressive, as that, but the strategy worked. Within 12 months, InfoWorld went from being a loss-making organization overall to now, a significantly profitable one. But more exciting was the energy that came into the organization. The people just, totally re-energized, very, very positive. And actually, the team at InfoWorld is some of the most aggressively innovative, in our organization. I know, but they got a minute left, but I wanted to just say that, IDG's, move, with InfoWorld was just part of an overall strategy and focus on really moving aggressively into the digital world. We're focusing on building digital audiences, really building about fast and online and soon to be mobile. We're thinking about how our audiences really engage. If I leave you with one point, I think about how you can measure the engagement of audiences on your sites. Look at the sort of key metrics that could be behind that, the intensity of the audience with your content. build networks, grow your grow your audience. Look at the new revenue streams. We'll be talking more about that as well. Prepare for mobile and think soon about what's going to happen as we move towards the semantic web, the Web 3, where we will be looking at content even less as documents and articles and a series of interrelated objects.
Okay. Essentially, we find ourselves at the nexus of three very fast-changing technological shifts in terms of video online, and television. The first one is the television cameras, broadcast television cameras, which used to be these big, heavy things that cost $80,000 and sit on your shoulder, and you still see them on the street, have now been reduced to something you can hold in the palm of your hand, cost a couple of $100. Any idiot can operate them. They're point and shoot, they're high def, they're a remarkable piece of technology. The second one is that edit suites, which when I started at CBS News doing Sunday morning, edit suites cost $500,000 to $1 million. It took an editor to do them. It took forever to edit. Today, editing has been reduced to a piece of software that sits on a laptop. It costs a couple of $100, but everybody steals it, and basically any moron can operate these things. They're drag and drop. And any 9-year-old can edit a broadcast quality piece. The third shift here that came, of course, the internet went to video. So the demand for video has gone through the ceiling. And these changes have, this is what I've been working with for the last 20 years. We began initially by building television stations and networks predicated on this technology. A long time ago, I did New York 1, which you're probably familiar with, where reporters carried their own cameras, and they were big, and they got smaller and smaller. I did Channel 1 in London. I went to the BBC. We started to restructure whole networks. So in a typical local news operation, you might have 250 or 300 or 400 people in a local news operation putting 8 or 10 camera crews on the street. This is an act of insanity. Nothing personal, Andrew. You worked in a different time, but times have changed. Amen. Yeah, there you go. That's right. So What we do is for local television stations or even networks like we did with the BBC, we come into a newsroom, we find 50 people in the newsroom who can do this, we give each of them a camera and a laptop edit, we teach them to shoot and cut, we run the newsroom like a newspaper, we go, here's your camera, there's the door, see you 6, go make content, because that's what it's really about. And as a result, we take the station from having 8 camera crews on the street to having 50 camera crews on the street, from having 6 edit suites to having 50 edit suites, and then we can fire half the staff, which doesn't make us very popular, but it makes us very cost effective because you don't need these people. You don't need cameramen, you don't need soundmen, you don't need producers, you don't need reporters, you don't need the truck, you don't need the van, you don't need all the people like the infrastructure of newspapers that made the television station work. What you need is the content, and I agree 100% with Edward. Don't cut the content, you cut the distribution, the manufacturing thing. So we were very successful in doing that in terms of television stations. We did the BBC, Dutch television, Danish television, Swedish television. We did a couple of stations in the United States. If you Google my name, you'll see how people hate me. Screw them, I couldn't care less. So, no, but it's too bad. You know, we say to cameramen all the time, I'm sorry, you're in an archaic job that doesn't exist anymore. Go do something else. And it's too bad, but this is going to happen. This transition, as the web went to video, it became obvious that as newspapers went to video on one side and the web went to video on the other side, newspapers had to start doing video. Newspapers are not about print. Newspapers are an organization that goes in the community, finds stories, and puts them out to the public. And if the public is online, the public has an expectation of video online. It's part of your job. But newspapers can't go out and they can't hire cameramen, soundmen, producers, editors, and start making TV shows because they'll go broke even faster than they go broke now. But what we discovered with newspapers and magazines is they are magnets for journalists. People who come to work for newspapers and magazines and television are there because they want to tell stories. So what we did was we started to empower the people in the building with cameras and edits and laptops and go, here is how you become a digital journalist as opposed to a print journalist. A digital journalist, somebody who goes out in the community with a little digital acquisition machine like a laptop and a camera, and they gather the story. And then they can make the story in print, or they can make the story in video, or they can make the story in audio, or they can do anything they want with the story. That's what we did with the Star Ledger, where I think we've had a great success. We'll find revenue. Don't worry, I got a lot of ideas for you. But we've also done it with all the McGraw-Hill publications. We're now taking the same thing. This is an enormously fast-moving area and very easy to do. I know. Okay, because your newsrooms are getting very close to the end. Final point, and there's a lot of other points to be made for this. The last transition of this thing, which is the most interesting, is, well, it's all about training. If you don't train these people, it doesn't really work. And to teach them to be a conventional reporter and a conventional cameraman and a conventional is an act of insanity, because digital video acquisition is a very, very different business. So the core of our business, of course, is training people. And if you want, come to see me, because we don't charge that much, and it actually works out pretty well. But we've started a process now with Travel Channel, of all people, where we start something called Travel Channel Academy, where anybody can walk in off the street and take a 4-day training course with us to learn to be a digital travel journalist. This feeds the network. We've now put 1,000 people around the world for Travel Channel doing content. We charge them $2,500 for the 4-day course. We're totally booked up through 2009 with people who want to do this thing. It's not a bad business, and we can do it with you also, because there's an appetite among the average public to participate in this great dialogue that Edward talked about. It's the public who wants to join in. And just like blogging, video blogging or vlogging is going to become a very, very powerful process, but you have to learn how to do it. Is that it? My time up? Terrific.